Hi, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner with the Robust Opposition. How are you, Lee?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Despite all the time zone difficulties, we made it work.
So the first thing that I wanted to ask you, Lee, and not to sound too much like Barbara Walters, because I know you and I like to talk about the issues. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about you as a person, where you grew up, where you went to college, what your original career choice was when you were in college, how you got to be a comedian, and how you started doing your show.
I actually was born at Walter Reed Army Hospital here in Washington, D.C. I grew up in D.C. until I was 8 years old, then Richmond, Virginia. My father was in the military for 20 years, retired as a colonel, was in Vietnam. And then I started writing comedy when I was about 12, pretty young. I thought I wanted to be a humor writer, and so I kept doing that. So I was writing a bunch of stuff, comedic stuff, really no politics involved in it. But then wanted to start doing stand-up, wanted to start performing, even though I'd never been on a stage. So at 17, I started that, doing stand-up comedy, also writing the humor column at University of Virginia, that type of thing. Moved to New York to do comedy immediately after that. Didn't get into the kind of politics and activism really until I was about 23, 24. The invasion of Iraq started to wake me up a lot more. And then I basically got what I consider my true education, which was after college, reading books by, John Perkins and Chris Hedges and so many others, Chomsky, that really woke me up to the fact that watching MSNBC and considering yourself a lefty is not really the answer, and you're not getting all of the facts. You're getting the other side of the corporate monster rather than outside of that monster. So I became more and more of an activist. Occupy was definitely pretty pivotal in terms of both my activism and my stand-up. Someone asked me to help put out a call for the occupation to begin, and I did that. And they tried to get one in June 2011. It didn't really take, and then they got some bigger people to sign on, and then the September one actually took, and I was down in Zuccotti on the first night, and ended up performing a mix of a speech and a comedy routine at about a dozen different occupations across the country and Canada, and through all this time still doing all my stand-up and everything. So then 4 years ago started doing the TV show Redacted Tonight. But yeah, I've been doing stand-up comedy for about 20 years, and most of that time it's been either cultural commentary or political of some form.
You and I have a similar history because while I was political in college, I didn't get repoliticized until George Bush started making noises about invading Iraq, and something seemed amiss to me. I was a little bit political in the 90s. That was the decade I was doing all the yuppie stuff, remodeling my house, having my kids, looking into preschools, all that stuff. And I remember in the mid-90s wondering why I agreed with conservatives like Pat Buchanan and Ross Perot about NAFTA. And
I know that in order to see a criticism of NAFTA, you had to look to Ross Perot.
I know. And that great giant sucking sound, that wonderful quote of his, really turned out to be true. I, too, got more radicalized during Occupy. I went to the very first day here of Occupy LA, which was October 1st or 7th, I can't remember. And then I was down in Washington, D.C. a week later, coincidentally, for Campaign for America's Futures conference, their annual conference. And that was the same weekend that Occupy Washington, D.C. started with Kevin Zeese and Margaret Flowers.
They called their Stop the Machine. I was at the first day of that one, too, yeah.
We marched to the Chamber of Commerce that day, and they were so afraid of us. They actually
I was there with you, yeah.
Yeah, they actually shut the building down. So,
yeah.
But in fact, I think I met you during Occupy. You came out here to do a show. I remember it was a little club on Melrose, and I went and introduced myself to you. And that was the first time, I think, maybe the only time we met in person, actually. But
I did another show with you later, but yeah.
Yeah?
I think so. The one that Rooftop Revolutionaries played on.
Oh, yeah. The one at the Arts District.
Yeah.
That was great. That was great. So I love the your show open, Redacted Tonight, because you use the song, the Rooftop Revolutionary song, that it's so great. Speaking of Occupy, RT was one of the only outlets that really covered Occupy. They covered us a lot. They were
Emmy nominated for that coverage, yeah.
Oh, they were. Oh, that's good to know. So what I noticed about them at the time was nobody was pointing them out as a Russian agent to make it register as a Russian agent. And as a matter of fact, they employed journalists that had previously worked for mainstream news outlets and then subsequently went to work for mainstream news outlets. I remember the guy who was covering us here in Los Angeles went down to the ABC affiliate in San Diego after he left RT. You know, just like that documentary Control Room about Al Jazeera, which I urge everybody to watch. I mean, these are professional news operations. They're not propaganda arms. However, I will say that what you can't deny is they are owned by the Russian government. And just like Press TV, which is owned by the Iranian government, Press TV also did fair coverage of Occupy. They do want to report on dissent in our country, which is fine. I mean, they may have different reasons for reporting on dissent than you and I have, but it still has to be acknowledged that that is one of their motivations. However, what they are reporting is not necessarily propaganda. I mean, to say that it is would have to say that Larry King is an agent of the Russian government. Do you want to comment on your dealings with RT?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, their motivations are their motivations, but I think that the opinion shows that are at RT, such as Larry King and Chris Hedges and me and Mike Papantonio and Tom Hartman was here until recently, and Abby Martin, we're given a huge freedom to say things that are not allowed on our mainstream networks, or really almost any American national network does not allow this type of criticism of the corporate state, of unfettered capitalism. And there's so many things that I can say at this network, and I wouldn't be at a network that didn't let me say everything I want to say, which is why I had never thought I'd actually have a regular show on TV, because my stuff is not really appreciated by the corporate entities. I've never been told to say anything. I've never been censored. And you compare that to these other networks, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, where they are very much censoring what their people are saying. Melissa Harris Perry, who had a show at MSNBC for a long while and then was forced out, she went on Democracy Now! Following her being forced out, and said that they censored such things as her talking about the Beyonce Super Bowl halftime show. They wouldn't let her talk about it because it was Black Power inspired, and that was somehow, too edgy for them. So you compare the amount of censorship that is done at all these other networks with the fact that I've never been censored, and I write my show, I write every word I say on the show, and it's just a completely different animal. And, people are welcome to criticize what I do and everything, but I just would ask that they take my show for what it is, watch it, and decide whether I'm lying to them or not.
Yeah, tell me how you construct your show every week. How much work goes into creating an episode of Redacted Tonight? And what do you do to come up with the topics and prepare and get the guests?
Yeah, I mean, it is a lot of work. I have an amazing team of about 5 people here: John F. O'Donnell, Naomi Caravani, Natalie McGill, Michelle Greenstein, and Yoki Danoff. But I write all of my words, so it is an exhaustive process every week. It's a combination of writing and coordinating things and coordinating graphics and guests. And I do have 2 shows. So there's the interview show, which you mentioned, booking guests. And that show is usually there's some humor in it, but there's no live audience. So I am trying less to go for that many laughs. And then the other show, which is the live audience, taped here in DC. And like I said, I write all my words, and it takes all week, and it's exhaustive, but it's well worth it. And it's my passion. So I'm excited to be able to do it.
Now, do you get paid by RT?
Yeah, like any television host, you're paid by the network.
Right. That's what I was thinking about. So Yeah. So, so the stuff that you do with Patreon and other things, that's just extra supplemental income.
So the only thing I don't have anything on Patreon anymore. The only thing I have is you can donate at my website, and that goes to stuff that is unrelated to RT. My website is, I'll write articles that are not RT related, and I also have other people. You mentioned Eleanor Goldfield. Sometimes she writes things for it, and so it's a combination. You know, it's very little money. It's a lot of people chip in $5 a month or something, but that money goes to all things that are separate from RT.
And you still tour with your regular comedy show. How much travel do you do every year?
I try and do about 2 cities a month. I'd say it averages out to. I can only get out on the weekends because I got to come back here and make the show every week. So about 2 weekends a month, it averages to go to other cities and around the United States. Unfortunately, it's almost always the United States because getting back to DC every week means I can't go far.
Now, I wanted to ask you, do you ever travel to red states, and how is your comedy received there?
I was just in Texas this past weekend. I played the liberal bastion, Austin, and then I also played Houston. My comedy is received great in red areas, but that's because it's my fans coming out. I do understand, I did years of touring as a comedian that was not to my fans. You go to comedy clubs and you play to people who show up for comedy. They don't know what they're getting. And so I had to learn how to make everyone laugh. Nowadays, I'm playing shows to, a small theater of fans of the show. So that is a bit of a different beast. But it allows me to know that the audience is at least somewhat informed on these issues, because it is tough when you're going in front of drunk people at 2 a.m. to talk about, cultural criticism and political matters. But I think for young comedians out there, I think it was important that I had all those years of playing to make a whole room laugh. That was all different types of people, years in New York, thousands of shows to all different types of people. There was nobody was coming because they were looking for a left-wing comedy show or something. So that was an important years in the trenches for me.
And why do you think that comedy, and in particular sarcasm, because you really employ sarcasm masterfully when you do your shows, and thanks. I kind of think you remind me as a younger. I came up with this phrase as I was thinking about you last night, like Larry David on cocaine.
Yeah, I guess I've got a little more energy than Larry David.
Right? I mean, but the same kind of,
yeah, I don't know. It's kind of the regular me, but maybe amped up a little. It's kind of like me at my angriest is the way I go into a lot of shows. And I'm talking about the topics that make me angriest, so it's not like I have to manufacture fury about these issues with what's going on in the world and everything. So yeah, it's definitely a part of me. It's not like I need to utilize that part in every conversation. I think some people are afraid to walk up to me because they think I'm going to scream at them. But I know how to to chill out when I hang out with someone.
But I'm just talking about sarcasm in general. I mean, yeah. when I grew up, I was watching TV in the 60s as a little kid. I'll admit how old I am. And the comedy was very sweet. There wasn't a lot of sarcasm. Today, sarcasm is so rampant. It's even in children's television. I mean, I cringed to see what my kids were watching. First was SpongeBob, then with Family Guy, and then with South Park. And it's like, what is it about the zeitgeist of today that makes sarcasm so important?
Yeah, it is interesting that snarkiness and sarcasm has become something that's actually kind of infiltrated shows that are not considered comedy. I mean, Rachel Maddow is constantly using snark, and so is Cenk Uygur. And so a lot of these news shows, you could almost consider there's a bit of a comedy element to them simply because they have so much snark and kind of sarcasm in it. But I always try and go farther than that. I don't want to just lay back. It can seem a little lazy in terms of the growth of comedy to just fall back on every time, you play a clip of Trump and you go, yeah, that's smart. Like, that's kind of too easy, I think. So I try and get a little deeper than that. But I think there was definitely with the generation that grew up with me, it was like you weren't cool unless you were part of this ironic detachment, which is fine as a teenager. But then, I didn't fit into a lot of the underground comedy rooms in New York City back when I was there more like 10 years ago, because most of them, you really had to have that ironic detachment. I don't care, man, whatever. And it's like, I have a lot of humor, I have a lot of sarcasm, I have a lot of snark, but I do not have ironic detachment. I have a fury about this stuff, a passion. And, I lived in Williamsburg, which is considered hipster central, and Brooklyn. And the shows there didn't like me. I would go to other places to perform because even if they agreed with me, it was like you getting angry about these issues was not considered cool. And I think we've got to move out of that. And I actually think that most young people are moving out of that to past acting like they don't care, because we're in a time where if you don't care, we are fucked. Like, this is the time to start acting like you give a shit.
Yeah. The anger is really useful too, because I was dating a guy and he said, "Why are you always so angry?" And I'm like, "I'm not angry, I'm passionate." I mean, what you're noticing here is righteous anger. So if I'm talking about Jamie Dimon and the Wall Street banksters, and I've got really what would sound to him like hatred in my voice, and he's sort of this apolitical guy. Don't worry, we broke up. I can't go out with apolitical guys. I mean, at least he wasn't a Republican, right? Anger, I always use the term righteous anger because it's what drives activists. If we weren't angry about these things, we wouldn't spend the kind of time we do, activating against them.
That's why I always tell people, if someone says to you, don't stop talking about politics, you're upsetting people, or, don't not during dinner or what. Like, here's the thing is, when people say that, silence is a political stance. Silence is a full-throated defense of the status quo. So if someone tells you, "Oh, shut up, don't bother people," that's a political statement. That's a statement of everything's fine. This is going to be all right. Stop getting angry about it. So if people tell you not to be political, I say you tell them they're being equally political. They're just doing it in a lazy, sad kind of way.
Right. Now, I want to shift a little bit into the issues, and I'm going to a full shot of my little sign there that I got from Occupy. That's Occupy LA art, which I want to frame someday. And it basically says 99% you can't arrest an idea. Now, I'm becoming very concerned about whether that statement is true anymore, because we're seeing a lot of censorship. You've done shows about what Google and what Facebook and what Twitter are doing. And there is a lot of pressure by the deep state. And I always have to say, when I use the term deep state, that unlike what most progressives today think, it is not an alt-right term. I actually heard it on that super liberal show, the Bill Moyers show. Bill Moyers had a show in 2014 with a guy named Mike Lofgren, who had worked for Congress, and the show was called Anatomy of the Deep State. I believe that it was military, industrial, intelligence complex plus Wall Street that is really running things. So the fact that when I try to point this out, that the deep state right now is trying to foment a coup d'etat, an internal coup d'etat against Trump. Of course, they say that I'm getting my news from Fox or Breitbart. Anybody that uses the term deep state cannot be taken seriously. What's concerning me is so many people on the left right now are conveniently in league with the deep state, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, every other agency that during Obama's rule, we were not happy with. I mean, remember during Occupy, we talked about the NDAA, we talked about so many things where they were trying to restrict our rights. And now it's like nobody cares about our rights anymore as long as we can get Donald Trump out of office.
Yeah, I mean, what they're doing is they're failing to take any nuance into this argument or discussion, and failing to look at history before Trump. the deep state is not an idea that just showed up with Trump. As you said, I saw that Bill Moyer's show too. And as you said, the idea of deep state has been around for a while, and it did not originate with Trump. So and furthermore, saying that the deep state, meaning the CIA, the intelligence apparatus, the Pentagon, want to kind of surround Trump and force his hand and force him to stop being an anti-war candidate, which he claimed to be, and force him to do other things, and that mechanism will continue to run in the way it's run for years and years is not. It's not saying you love Trump. It's not saying you support Trump. It's just saying, guess what? If that weren't Trump, if that were Bernie Sanders, they'd be doing the same shit. All right. They would be circling the wagons to make sure that a Bernie Sanders or a left-wing president couldn't actually make changes that are out of a very defined little box of options. It's pro-war, it's pro-Wall Street, and it keeps moving along. And if you've noticed, all the people in Trump's circle that were anti-war have basically been forced out. I'm no Steve Bannon white supremacy fan, but he did want to bring back the 800 military bases around the world, and he did want to get out of these interventionist wars. And so they've all been forced out. Trump's been surrounded by military generals and CIA, and that is increasing. And it really is a kind of a deep state military intelligence coup that's going on. Now, again, that doesn't mean I like Trump. It doesn't mean I like Trump's decisions. I think he's horrible. But we shouldn't look at these at the deep state and the CIA and the FBI as our friends. All right, the FBI infiltrated Occupy. At the end of Occupy, some estimates say that a third of the people were there were FBI or FBI affiliated. And so it's laughable that these are our friends. They've also, by the way, and I did a show on Redacted Tonight on this a week ago or whatever, taken over the Democrats running for office right now. A quarter of all Democrats, the 220 that have the funding to actually be competitive, are either military, ex-intelligence, ex-CIA, ex-State Department. Like, that is crazy. That's unprecedented. On either side, that's never happened, that many people running for office are ex-military intelligence. So you look at that and you go, oh, yeah, those are the Democrats. How is that Democrats? There are no anti-war Democrats. What are there, 5 of them out there anymore? So we should be furious about this rather than just pointing and saying, oh, that means you're pro-Trump. No, I fucking hate Trump. But guess what? I don't want the military industrial complex to own our government either.
What with Trump putting in John Bolton, who just wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal last week saying it may be time to bomb North Korea. I did a show last week with John Matthew Loritz on North Korea. And it was great for me because this was a country that I didn't really know the history of. I was skeptical of the mainstream media bullshit that they're trying to feed us, but I didn't really have any facts in my arsenal to combat it until I read John's article and we did this show. And it turns out that Korea is just like any of the other countries that had the temerity to want to run their own country for their own people and did not want to be a client state of U.S. imperialism. And the Kim family, now I'm sure they've committed some atrocities. I understand they've had, political prisoners in jail for life. Similarly, Assad is no angel. And so when I've been talking about Syria, which people also don't understand, these leaders of these countries, and this is why the CIA has been trying to overthrow these regimes since the 50s.
Right.
Both of these regimes, Syria and North Korea, they're nationalists. They want the resources for their country to stay with the people. Free healthcare, free education, free everything. And
you're right. This is not saying these people, Kim Jong-il was a good guy or whatever. It's the people are suffering there. But you look at these are the countries that had the nerve to throw off the yoke of the United States. And you look at a place like North Korea, we killed a third of their population during the Korean War. That is unheard of. There were generals who said it was horrific, that we were just napalming everything we could get our hands on. A third of a population. During World War II, the U.S. lost 0.5% of our population. It's a third is crazy. So you can't exactly blame them for being a little skeptical of our desires. And just the other day, a month ago, Tillerson was in a filmed conversation with Condoleezza Rice, and he was talking about how our economic sanctions are working, and the proof that they're working is that North Korean fishermen are starving to death out at sea, and then the ghost ships show up on, in South Korea or whatever. And his point was that we have so crushed their economy, they are starving to death because they can't find enough fish. And he pointed to that as success, as we are winning. We are winning by starving sad people to death. How is that winning? What is that? That's what we stand for? Oh, if we starve them to death, then we're saving them. It's the dumbest, most backward, most immoral, illogical way to ever view anything. So, and furthermore, we look at, let's say it is a horrible. Who do you think suffers when we bomb the shit out of a country? Do you think it's just the leader? No, we kill 1 million people. In Iraq, we killed 1 million people. People that are desperate and need, a better economy and food and, jobs or whatever. They're the ones that suffer, that we bomb. If we were to bomb North Korea, how many innocent civilians would we kill right now? It's crazy. So it's like the whole moral argument has just been flipped on its head. And one last thing I forgot to say earlier about deep state. I had Ray McGovern on the other day on Redacted VIP to talk about that. And he was in the CIA for 27 years. He was the presidential briefer for Reagan and I believe the first Bush. So this is a guy who knows his shit. 27 years in the CIA, and he said deep state is absolutely real, and it is absolutely, these entities continue down this path no matter who is at the executive position. And what they're trying to do right now, which is force war with North Korea and Iran and continued war with Syria, is horrific.
Yeah, I mean, my own congressman, Ted Lieu, who I supported, and I donated money to him because he told me at a fundraiser that he was pro net neutrality, anti-TPP, anti-fracking. I ended up not voting for him in 2014 because I watched a debate with his Republican opponent at a temple in which he said people that support the BDS movement are anti-Semitic bigots. So essentially he was calling me a self-hating Jew because I support the BDS movement. But he was really good on Yemen a couple of years ago. He actually authored that bill to say we should not fund Saudi Arabia as long as they're still bombing the shit out of Yemen. But he was nowhere to be seen recently supporting a Bernie's bill with Mike Lee, because for the last year, he's been making his fame by tweeting Trump. He actually he tweeted something where some publication said, "Oh, you're out tweeting Trump," and this is what he wants his legacy to be. Yeah. And he was one of 8 congressmen in California who did not sign on to that resolution calling for the repeal of net neutrality. Okay.
And he's also ex-military, isn't he?
Yeah, he is ex-military, and he also voted against the Iran deal, which in my opinion was one of Obama's best decisions. Yeah, so North Korea, we dropped more bombs on them than we did in the entire Pacific theater in World War II. And the only reason we stopped bombing was there was nothing left to bomb. I mean, it really is horribly sad. And it also puts me in mind of Cuba, because I was in Cuba with Code Pink in 2015. And that is a country, even though it's a communist country, even though they have one-party rule, I saw that they had more democracy there than I think we have in this country, because we live in an oligarchy here, of course, where the billionaires and the corporations control everything. There, at least every citizen can participate in a local election, and then there's a provincial election, and then there's the national elections, and they're able to have a very participatory government there, even though they only have one party. So it's kind of a myth that, you have these two parties and therefore that's what makes a democracy. What makes a democracy is whether people have any control over what happens in their lives. And as you probably remember from from Occupy, anarchism, which I used to think was violence and chaos until I studied it, is really democracy without government.
And even if the votes are just being counted, they're a step above us, right? I mean, the number of, you're in California, the number of quote unquote provisional ballots that was given out in your election, which is really placebo ballots. It's basically sign your name here so we can ignore your vote, was crazy in the election. And, that's just one example. I've done many a show on the election frauds that have gone on, but I just had a great activist on. It won't air till next week, but talking about how apparently almost all of the machines in this country actually do take images of the ballots, and those ballots the images don't have names on them. So in reality, if these officials actually did what we should do, those images should be public. And you could hook it all up to your TV screen and you could have your own recount in your living room, because you can see all of these images. But they've run all over the place to make sure that these images of each and every ballot are destroyed and not kept and not made public, because they know they're rigging the game. And so, and they're taking them to court in several areas. Arizona is one of them, but many other states, to say, hey, these are part of the public record. There's no reason that these ballot images should not be available for all of us to recount how these elections are ending up, the results that are ending up. In the primary that happened this week, the Democratic primary in Illinois, the actual progressive, Newman, her votes were with 86% reporting. In one county, she had 7,000, something votes. Then with 88%, so 2 more percent comes in, suddenly that drops down to 4,000 votes. She lost nearly half her votes when the next 2% came in, which either means that the New York Times vote tracker is completely wrong, which should infuriate all of us, because how are we supposed to monitor these things? Or it means that even that vote's rigged. So we have a completely illegitimate election system in this country, and people should be up in arms about it and demand to see the photos of these ballots.
Well, the only thing good coming out of this Russiagate thing, this Russiagate bullshit, is that they are asking now, they want to have paper ballots, actually paper ballots where people write it in and they can hand count it. So, but what concerns me is that, why are they worried about 100,000 Facebook ads? And this whole thing with Cambridge Analytica. I mean, there was a great article in The Verge where they talked to political science experts that say, even if they tried to do this, nobody's believing them, because it's much easier to influence somebody as a consumer than as a voter. So the idea that we're all so gullible and that we bought into all this stuff and that we voted the way that we did because of, Russian troll farms or Cambridge Analytica, it's just mind-boggling. And they're not concerned about the $5 billion. No, you don't see them talking about the $5 billion of free advertising that the media gave Trump. So if anybody wants to blame anyone for Trump, blame the mainstream corporate media.
I know, 23 times as much coverage for Trump as Bernie Sanders during the primaries. And, the people that want to say, oh, well, some of it was negative coverage about Trump. First of all, Trump has based his entire career on the idea that there is no such thing as bad press. And man, does it work. And furthermore, lots of times they would just show Trump's podium before he was going to give a speech for 20 minutes that just said, donate here, Trump. He just had an endless running ad for Trump. It's like insane.
Yeah, I remember that. Or, and they also don't talk about the wealthy people like the Koch brothers. Meanwhile, the Koch brothers are underground right now doing all their little damage that they've been
funding both sides, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, they helped create Bill Clinton's career by funding the DLC or whatever it's called, the Democratic Leadership Council, and they were one of the earliest donors to that. So they give more to the Republican side, but they help fund both sides because they know, hey, that we covered all our bases, right? We got both sides in our pocket. What do we have to worry about? To go to the Russian troll stuff for a moment, I've been talking about Cambridge Analytica for a year because I was like, if you want to talk about the actual influence of data mining, this was a year ago I first covered this, funded by Robert Mercer, also influential with the Brexit votes. The Cambridge Analytica has been running around giving speeches bragging about how they were involved in 44 U.S. elections and had nearly 100% win rate. Meanwhile, we're acting like these 13 trolls at a clickbait farm that put up puppy memes were somehow the real villains in this. It's so laughable. But the corporate Democrats cannot turn inside and actually question, why did we lose this election? Why do we have someone that's so abhorrent that it can't even beat an orange reality star? And the reason is because they don't offer anything outside of what the Republicans are offering. They're offering big banks and Wall Street and endless war and endless police state. And so if you're offering the same thing as the other side, no, you're not going to beat them. But they can't ask those questions. They can't actually question that. So instead they have to say, be afraid of the other, be afraid of the people over there. And, people talk about Trump's bigotry for hating immigrants, which he is. He's a bigot and a racist. But guess what? This is another form of racism and xenophobia. Just, be afraid of Russians or whoever, Iranians or whatever. It's still about, we can't actually question why it is people find our party not better than the pro-greed, pro-corporate party. And it's because we also are pro-greed, pro-corporate, pro-unsustainable, pro-destruction of our environment. So,
well, what worries me is not so much that they're doing it, although that's very worrisome. What's worrying me is what I mentioned earlier, that Bernie Sanders supporting progressives are now starting to believe this stuff. And these are the kind of people that I've been arguing with the most on Facebook. Yeah. I mean, the Hillary supporters, I don't even waste my time with. But our revolution, for example, Costa Mesa in Orange County is doing a town hall coming up, and they're going to have all the candidates who are opposing Dana Rohrabacher, who is one of the worst conservative Republicans. And they were putting that, here's what we're going to be discussing, including his connections with Russia. So on the Facebook event page, I write, please don't discuss Russia. That's fake news. Let's talk about the things that concern the American people, like the fact that they are working 2 and 3 jobs and they can't get ahead. The fact that they can't afford, to send their kids to college, that they can't afford their housing. I mean, affordable housing has become a huge issue here in California. And they want to talk about Dana Rohrabacher and Russia. So I started arguing with a whole bunch of people. And one of the guys, because I said, why don't you read How You're Being Manipulated? Why don't you read Manufacturing Consent by Noam Chomsky? Yeah. And then he wrote a whole treatise on how he read that and how he's referenced it and other Noam Chomsky. But Noam is a little wrong about this Russia thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. They are buying. A lot of them are buying into it, and they watch their Rachel Maddow and they go into that. It's amazing because she has become a level of conspiracy theorist that is up there with Alex Jones. It's like, I thought this was the thing you were fighting against. I thought these same people that consider themselves liberals or left or something would tear apart the idea of McCarthyism back under Bush and go after Republicans in the past decade, where they'd go, you're being McCarthyist. We already did this. Remember McCarthyism? And now they are the McCarthyists. They have become the thing they hated. So it's like, I didn't think we could get to this point because I thought we've done McCarthyism. It was a shameful time in our history. We see how sick and screwed up and just, illogical it is. So we'll do other mistakes. Don't get me wrong, but we won't do that again. But here we are doing it all again. And believe it or not, it's also the same lie as the WMD. It's the same people pushing it. It's Bill Kristol and Mueller. You can watch videos of Mueller and look, I want Trump investigated, but for shit he actually did. I go after his business ties and all other kinds of corruption. Absolutely go after him. But they're trying to invent, Mueller's indictment of these 13 trolls. This is the same guy who went in front of Congress and said, we know there's weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and we need to invade Iraq because there's weapons of mass destruction. He was head of the FBI then. These same people that should have been, the moment it came out there were no WMD, these people never should have been on a TV screen ever again, never should have gotten a job ever again. They should have been fired and marched out through the town with spoiled milk thrown at them. But instead, they're back and they're just pushing us into another Cold War. It's like, why would you ever be believed?
Well, it's interesting because I remember reading about those neocons. I was on a plane somewhere and I was reading a really lengthy article in Vanity Fair about Pearl and Wolfowitz and Kristol and all these guys. And one thing that I remember from that article is that when George Bush, W. Bush, came into office, they were trying to influence his administration. And they weren't able to do it until 9/11. And then all of a sudden, he used that he brought them in, and that became, sort of a rationale for why we had to invade Iraq.
That's Naomi Klein's shock doctrine, is you have these plans and you wait for something horrible to happen to use them.
Yeah, I mean, it's like what happened with New Orleans with Katrina. They closed all the private schools. The public schools, they're all charters now. They're doing the same thing in Puerto Rico. And this is what I worry about with the left, too, is we have our own conspiracy theories. You and I were talking about this before the show, whether it's Seth Rich, whether it's Pedogate. The left is very interested in these conspiracy theories. And I don't think there needs to be a conspiracy to have a bunch of people just kind of pursuing their own individual interests that just kind of coincide. And to me, Iraq was, it was the neocon. We need to make the world safe for democracy. It was the oil. It was, mostly, I think, contracts for Dick Cheney and Halliburton and Bechtel and Fluor. They made so much money reconstructing that country. There was Bush getting revenge for what his daddy didn't finish, all sorts of things. When somebody tries to, give me this conspiracy theory, I'm automatically suspicious because there's so many factors that go into it. And what's happening right now, a lot of people are trying to get rid of Trump. And like you said, I've been saying we should get rid of him on the emoluments clause, obstruction of justice, and also Article 24, I think it is. It's either 24 or 25, which is mental incapacity. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can use to get rid of Trump that don't involve fomenting a new Cold War, which could turn into a hot war with the nuclear power. And I've been saying since October of 2016, when I did a very lengthy live stream about the history of Russia and how it's been always threatened on its western borders, and the whole revisionist theory of the Cold War, which is they just wanted their sphere of influence. They didn't want to take over the whole world. And we broke all of our agreements that Roosevelt made to Stalin at Yalta, when Harry Truman came in, and he was the original Cold Warrior president.
You can't use history. We're supposed to forget our history. You can't. A very bad neo-McCarthyist.
Yes, and by the way, I've been using the hashtag McCarthyite for about 6 months now, so you can feel free to use it. I've got a lot of hashtags: counterfeit Kamala with a K, bought Booker with a B, and my newest one for our mayor, Gutless Garcetti.
I like them. I got to get running here. I have some stuff to finish on the show, but this has really been a pleasure.
Yeah, well, it was great talking to you, Lee. Thank you for giving me this time. I know you're super busy.
Thank you so much. If people haven't checked out the show and they want to, it's at leecamp.com or at leecamp on Twitter. Lauren, keep doing what you're doing. Keep getting the truth out there. Keep fighting.
Yeah, that's funny. I end my show with those same words. But thank you, Lee. I'm going to tell people what my show is coming up next. Hopefully you can come on again another time. It's been great.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. So, folks, I'm going to be on tomorrow between 9 and 11. I'm going to be covering the March for Our Lives, Los Angeles. And there's going to be thousands of people in downtown Los Angeles. We're going to be covering the first hour, which is the student speakers. I'm not very interested in the rest of the program, which is organized by the Women's March and the Pink Pussy Hat people. They're going to have a lot of music and celebrities. I really want to go down there and hear what the students have to say. And joining me for my coverage is going to be senatorial candidate Pat Harris. And he is a civil rights and criminal justice attorney who recently called for the resignation of our district attorney, Jackie Lacey, which is really, really important. This is a woman who has not prosecuted a single killer cop in the years since she's been district attorney. And the last case, which really set Pat off, was one in which the evidence was incontrovertible that the young homeless man this cop killed in Venice back in 2015 was unarmed. He was lying on the ground. He tried to say that the man was reaching for his partner's gun, but his partner contradicted him, said, "I didn't feel him reaching for my gun." The police commission agreed that it was a bad kill and awarded $4 million to the family. And this has never happened before. The police chief, Charlie Beck, called for his prosecution. And just 10 days ago, Jackie Lacey, in an 88-page opinion, said that she's not going to prosecute him. So Pat Harris is going to be talking with me about criminal justice in Los Angeles, about school safety, about this new bill that we have to stop in the California legislature that actually just advanced. It passed the Education Committee. And please note that in California, we have 70% Democrats. So this is not a Republican move by any means. That would put armed guards in all the schools. And we know that schools are already over-policed, and usually that tends to have detrimental effects on students of color. So join us for our coverage tomorrow, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then Monday night, I'm going to have a show about the CAFO farms. These are the industrialized factory farms in the Midwest that have been bought by the Chinese. They are buying out all the small family farms in the heartland of our country, and they're polluting the hell out of the heartland of the country. And I'm going to be talking to some people who are fighting back. So that's going to be on my Facebook page at 7 p.m. Pacific time on Monday night. So until tomorrow, until Monday, I'm going to end my show, apparently the way Lee Camp always does, with the words, keep fighting.